2% of dudes rapping, they ain't nice as me. 98% ain't lived the same type of life as me. The judge gave me life and then they sent me where the life is be. That level 4 with depth and vice, the type of stuff they like to see. Two choices, fight or flee. I refuse to die a chump. I never been a mark, but damn, it's scary when that riot jump. I seen dudes cry, get pumped, and some sexually brutalized. Knew a dude who lost his life and he was only doing 5 year-long racial fights when homie all you do is ride. Lonely days and nights up in a hole causing suicide. From the moment you arrive, you see the Mexican mafia, AB skinheads with big giant swastikas, pro-black philosophers, the BGF, the Kumi, and Muslims who will murk you from the nation to the Sunni. That MS was loony, quick to ride up on they rival. Even Christians went to church, hide knives up in they Bible. Political and tribal, the Crips and Damus, the Long Beach, the Hubs and the Dubs and the Grooves, the IE, the Bakersfield, the Dago Pyrus, the Hustlers quick to roll.
Say what's cracking, YouTube? It's your boy 16 to life, and I'm back like I'm on a parole violation. Yard down. Now, for those of y'all that's new to my page, in 1994, I got arrested. I was eventually sentenced to 16 years plus life, and I served 24 years straight in the California prison system. Yeah, that's me gassing on that intro song, and if you want to get that, tap in with me at 16tolifemusic@gmail.com, and I'll give you the information on how to get it. Let's get in right into today's video, man. So, literally about 5-10 minutes ago, I'm scrolling through my YouTube comments, right, and I see somebody who makes a comment in reference to, and this is just this is not verbatim, right? I'm paraphrasing, but he was basically saying that, you know, doing time, when you're doing time as a black dude, and of course this was someone who wasn't black, you know, you guys have it relatively easy. All you have to do, especially if you're a non-affiliate, is stay out of the way and pretty much, you know, go home. You don't have it as hard as a Mexican dude or a white dude, right? And like I say, once again, I always say for individuals, man, if you've never done time in any particular race or any organization, you're really not qualified to speak on it because you're just watching things from afar, right? And so I, of course, beg to differ, right? And I'll break down why I don't necessarily think time is easy at all if you are a Crip, a Blood, a non-affiliate, or whatever, right? And first and foremost, we all know that you have a lot of different cars that fall under different umbrellas when you're doing time as a black convict, whether it's a Crip or Blood, you from up north, and I don't even know their structure well, even though I did a whole lot of time, right? I've never not been in a prison where there were dudes from Oakland, but still in all, you don't know, you know, they got their different little cliques and things, and, you know, dudes from up north in San Francisco and whatever. I've seen many riots jump off between different factions from them as well, right? And didn't quite know who was involved, just knowing that they was, you know, up north dudes or whatever, right? But so anyway, you know, that adds a bigger dynamic to it because you have all these other, when you have the other races, right? When you have the Hispanics from north or south, and then you have the whites in prison, you know, you pretty much will not see inner violence among those cars without it being already predetermined and somebody is given the word that it's okay to do this, you know, to do a certain violent thing to a certain individual. But of course, we know with the blacks, it's not like that. You know, the lack of unity creates bigger problems, right? You'll have a lot of different melees or small riots or whatever, you know, however you want to classify them, right? But let's start off with the county jail because that's where you first go when you get arrested. And then also a lot of these other races, when they hit the county jail, they all become unified, right? And once again, you don't have that with the black cars. And I know, particularly being down south, there is even less structure in the county jail, right? So you're going to have a lot of fights and a lot of fades, right? Whether you are gang affiliated or not. Now, I was in the county jail all of 2 days, I believe it was, before I got into my first fight. You know, I eventually was jumped by a couple of other dudes in there, cut on my back with some type of razor or some type of, you know, some type of cutting instrument that the dude had. Then I go to another part of the county jail like a day or two later as I'm making up my bed. I get into it with another dude, you know, so while I'm by being there with the first couple of days, right, I'm already in 2 or 3 fights. And then later on, I got moved out to Southwest, got into more fights and stuff out there, right? So it's always going to be turmoil, right? Especially if you're gang related, because when you step into any gang related tank, the first thing they want to know is where you're from. And if you happen to have some opposition in there, you're going to take some fades right off the back, right? I interviewed a white dude, and I can't remember the name of his page right now, right? But he said that he sat in amazement and wondering why that when he was in the LA County Jail, that when you have blacks come up in there, they would, find out where them dudes was from. They would move the bank. And these dudes sometimes, they would move the bunk. And these dudes sometimes would run off 3 or 4 head of fades, not even being in the tank, 15, 20 minutes. Now, we're going to keep it 100 because people say a whole lot of stuff, right? And people will talk a lot of stuff, but the majority of individuals do not want to get into a fight. When you have individuals pushing under a unified structure and it's time to go get somebody and it's organized or the word is given, a lot of times it's going to be a 3 or a 4, you know what I'm saying? It's not going to be a one-on-one. So that's much easier. That is much easier to handle in a lot of aspects, right? You have 3 or 4 individuals jumping on one individual. But when you have, when you have to go in there yourself, man, and fight somebody, it's not always that easy. And I've seen dudes fight dudes who have literally been 3 or 4 times their size just because they're from different, neighborhoods that don't get along. So, all that, fighting somebody your same size, man, it goes out the window, right? And so you can have dudes, just running. You have some dudes wilder than others who are literally fighting, 2 or 3 times a week, maybe even more. So, I mean, if we're going to sit back and be honest, man, that is definitely not easy, even just getting outside of the county jail. I've seen fights in the tank. I've seen fights on the bus, in the court. And when you're coming back from court, just fighting, right? And then when you get to prison, while it is a little bit more structure and you don't have dudes gang banging on each other's per se, those animosities are often still there, right? Even though what happens on the street stays on the street. So now you have individuals who will find other reasons to try to justify why they want to get into it with somebody, right? And so when I got to Salinas Valley, the first dude I happened to see get stabbed was a black dude. I've seen a lot of DPs, a lot of head up fights once again, a lot of stabbings. I have never been on a yard, maybe except with the exception of you know what? I was going to say maybe with the exception of B Yard in Ironwood without seeing a black dude get stabbed by another black. But then as I thought about it, no, there was also a stabbing. There was also a stabbing on B Yard. And I spoke on that situation. An individual got a knife from another individual from a whole entire different color. And the dude who got the knife, and when I say color, I'm talking about color of rag. And when the dude got the knife, he stabbed one of his homeboys on the yard. And I just happen to know this because I'm a good friend with, actually, I was good friends with both of the dudes. I was good friends with all 3 of the dudes. The dude who got stabbed, the dude who did the stabbing, and the dude who gave the dude the knife. And I keep in contact with 2 of the individuals since I've got released from prison. I haven't talked to the dude who actually got stabbed, but I've talked to the dude who did the stabbing, and I talked to the dude often who gave the dude the knife, right? So I have never been on any yard where there's a level 4, a level 3, or even a level 2 without seeing somebody black stabbed by another black, right? But we're going to talk about I've seen countless fades, riots, melees, jump off between different black individual cars, man. I've seen the Fresno car get into it with the Bloods. I've seen the Hoovers get into it with the neighborhood cars. And I don't do a lot of these riots, especially I never spoke about the riots between the Hoovers and the neighborhoods, right? And the main reason is because those 2 neighborhoods are within close proximity on the streets, right? And so I just felt that, talking about stuff like that could potentially add to what they still got going on. Now, say if I had seen a riot between the IEs and Oakland, I would be more willing to talk about that because on the streets, those individuals are not in close proximity and it was just a prison problem that just jumped off in prison. But when you talk about, like I say, stuff like between the neighborhoods and the Hoovers, which is still going on to this day, that's definitely, in my opinion, just potentially contributing to that what they got going on, right? I've seen one of my homies from IE stab another one of the homies from IE at CMC in the chapel. This dude stabbed this dude in the chapel. I was at Salinas Valley when you had one section of Muslims get into a riot with another section of Muslims in the chapel, in the mosque. I'm sitting outside waiting to go to the store. I just hear somebody yell, Allah Akbar! And all of a sudden, man, it's rumbling and stuff up in the chapel, and an alarm goes off. Eventually, the guards run up in there, right? So due to the lack of unity, it's always a lot of problems, right, within the black structure, right? And so when you're from outside looking in afar, you don't necessarily know what's going on. You're not privy to all the because blacks, we take pride in fighting, right? And so I interviewed and knowing how to defend ourselves. I interviewed a dude not too long ago, OG Bloodshot Red from Texas, right? And he said in the interview, or no, he said in another story that I had seen, even though they had a lot of knives and stuff, they took pride in going out and fighting each other, head up. And actually, me and Bloodshot Red, shout out to him, we're about the same age. So, that's just something that exists within the black culture. Every culture has things that is near and dear to them, right? So that's something that we pride in the black culture. It has nothing to do with not necessarily willing to use a weapon or whatever. That's how a lot of us, especially from a certain age group, that's how we measured whether you was a man or not. Would you be willing to go out there and fight head up and get it in, right? And so I've seen, way too many cell fights to name, to dudes calling each other into the cell so they don't get cracked, so they take it to the cell and get cracking right in the cell. Now that is, if anybody, man, have ever seen two dudes fighting in a small cell, that is a fierce battle weapon there. Not only because you're also fighting within close quarters, but because you're fighting around nothing but steel. The lockers are steel. The bed is steel. The wall is cement. You happen to miss the dude you're swinging at and hit one of them lockers or one of them cement things, it's going to be a wrap. I've seen a lot of dudes horse playing in the cell and stuff and just get jacked up just by horse playing, because when you're young, you go to prison, myself included, man. Sometimes we go up in there with the homies, we be wrestling around, wrestling, choking each other out, all that old type of stuff, right? But to see dudes go in there and get into a cold fight in that cell, is something to watch, man. And then like I said, I've seen riots I've seen the Compton car get into it with each other. I've seen, pretty much all cars in prison get into it with each other, like I said before, once again, with the exception of the East Coast. I've never seen the East Coast as a whole, kind of split into two groups and get into it. Of course, I've seen different members from East Coast have a personal beef with each other, but I'm talking about splitting into it and getting into it, and I've seen that happen with pretty much all of the cars. I've seen the Hoovers get into it in the day room with each other, fighting and stabbing each other. I told a story about a crazy wild dude from Hoover who was into it all the time. They said that he had 2 or 3 years in state prison, and then after that he had a life sentence in the feds, right? And so this dude was wild and off the chain, ends up going into the end up going into the chow hall one day and stabbing one of his homies right there in the chow hall. So I've seen a lot of, like I said, inner car turmoil. I've seen the Compton versus the Watts. When I first came to prison, a lot of these groups that I'm talking about was very close knit. Along with dudes from my section, the car that I rode with, the Inland Empire. And then as time progressed, you had more of these individuals getting into it out there on the street. And so once they came to prison, even if they then functioned with other individuals under a certain alliance on the streets, they was beefing with these individuals, potentially shooting at each other. So they bring that type of animosity with them to prison. So while they may hang with these dudes, they don't really have that same respect and that sense of unity like they may have had 10 or 15 years ago, right? And so I seen this all the time. Like I said, I've seen too many different melees and fights to name, and all this stuff is black on black. I've seen the Pomona Crips get into it with the Pomona Bloods. The IE versus the pretty much the whole entire LA car. With the exception of the Hoovers didn't get involved in it, right? But you had the man. It was vicious, right? You had the '60s, A-Trays, the main streets, the East Coasts, all these individuals, right? So for anybody to try to pretend that you have a easy ride doing time, as a black, whether you are Crip or Blood, really and frankly just don't know what the hell they're talking about, right? I told a story about the actor DeAndre Bonds, of how I happened to be in Ironwood with him on Sea Yard. Now here this dude, he comes to prison. At the time he came to prison, he was a well-known actor and had been in several rather big screen movies, right? I believe now he had, or at one point, I don't really watch a whole lot of TV, but he had played, I believe the character's name was Scully on Snowfall. He had been in Three Strikes, Get on the Bus, The Wood. So here's this dude, right? He comes to prison, and it would seem like individuals, who were black would pretty much, embrace this dude, give him a pass or whatever, due to his somewhat celebrity status and just the fact that he had accomplished a lot by being able to, break through in Hollywood and get on the big screen, right? And play some prominent roles, No, man, they pressed on this dude for whatever reason. I don't know, right? But I don't know if it was because in several of this dude's roles, he played the role of a Blood. But at the end of the day, somebody got the wild idea that this dude had money and they was on this dude. He was going out on visits. He was bringing back certain things that was real sought after in prison. And, man, they was on this dude's helmito. Now, just so happened, he happened to be close friends with one of my homies from my particular car, right? And so my homie is telling him, hey, man, you going to have to handle your business and stop letting these dudes bully you or whatever. And my homie was telling him, you're going to have to get you a weapon, and next time one of these dudes try to press you, get cracking. But no, he chose not to do that, man. He chose to just roll up and leave up off the yard, right? And then he went to another yard, and he had the same problem. And he has came on, he has done YouTube interviews and talk about that, right? And spoke about that, right? I talked about, man, how I had ran across this African dude, the Bloods was pressing on him and stuff. And so there are many, I guess, unnamed incidents, or because even me doing in prison, I can't see everything, but there are a lot of things that go on while you're doing time, as a black convict, whether you're Crip, Blood, non-affiliate, Christian, whatever. Sometimes, man, if you are pushing in there and you're not pushing with a structure, you are going to have some people who try to prey on you. And depending on who you are and how you carry yourself, you may or you may not have individuals, who stick up for you. You know what I'm saying? And so it's definitely not an easy situation. And once again, like I said, man, you have a lot of blacks who believe in taking head up faith, going in the cell or going in the chapel or finding a blind spot and getting it out of the way, right? And so, like I say, once again, man, to me, in my opinion, it definitely is not as complicated as when you have an organized structure and they say, okay, you know what, you guys go get this dude and it's going to be 3 or 4 of you guys. To me, that's not necessarily as complicated as going to handle your business one-on-one, continuously fighting, catching fades. I knew some dudes, man, who was fighting in prison all the time. I mean, that's what they done. They caught fades, they fought. Like I said, I have never been in a prison where I didn't see a black dude stab another black dude. So you may have not seen, or I may have not seen as much knife play among blacks as you do with other races, right? But I believe a lot of that is behind cultural differences and opinions, right? Like I said, once again, a lot of us blacks take pride in fighting. I remember literally being from the age of about 6. My uncle would have me in the backyard teaching me how to fight, how to hold my hands, somewhat training me, basically, not somewhat, basically training me. They all was boxers and took pride in knowing how to box. Then he would take me down the street and have me fight a dude, have me fight his friend's nephew, who was about my age, right? So there was just an extremely large emphasis on, knowing how to fight and things of that nature, man. And so, like I said, I've seen numerous things go on, man. Even at CMC, where a lot of people try to say it's a weak prison or whatever, right? I've seen several stabbings, or at least heard of several black on black stabbings at CMC, because once again, when you have less structure, at times people are going to be a little wilder, and then you do have these different cars who don't necessarily like each other, or they get into it on the street, and so sometimes they look for issues to get into it with in prison, right? I've seen, like I said, just a lot of different situations, right, that definitely make me know that it's not easy doing time as a black convict in the California prison system, But anyway, you already know what it is, man. It's your boy 16 to life. Resume normal program.